You're not going to put it in somebody's head if they weren't thinking about it before. One of the other barriers that comes up to asking that question is like, is it going to be a little bit awkward if they weren't, if that isn't what they meant? And do you know what? Yeah, it might be. If you say, are you thinking about taking your own life? And they say, no, I actually didn't mean that at all. Yeah, all right. We can deal with a tiny amount of awkwardness. Like that is, you have to weigh that against the prospect of being in that situation, not asking the question and regretting that later. Now, none of us are perfect. If you have been in that position, and I have been in that position, like looking back and looking at that hindsight and wishing that I'd asked the question, you do not deserve to beat yourself up about that. Nobody does. Nobody has that perfect foresight. But you do have an opportunity in the future to consider asking that question when you're in that position again. That is, what you can do. And you have that opportunity to potentially save somebody's life. That is one of the most wonderful things that you can do.
Season 4, Episode 2, Suicide, Burnout, and the Courage to Talk. I'm joined by Laurence Davies, who brings both lived experience and many years of senior leadership in the UK mental health charity sector.
Now, let's dive into today's episode of Burnout to Brilliance.
Welcome, Laurence. It's so good to have you here with me. I've really been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while now, and I'm excited to get stuck in. I'm wondering, as a starting point, perhaps if you could share a little about your own journey that led you into the world of mental health and that being a passion for you as a topic.
Absolutely. And let me just start by echoing back, how excited I am to be having this conversation with you. Some of the conversations that we've had with each other off camera, as it were, over a little period of time have been so inspiring to me. And I'm delighted to get this time to explore this topic, or these topics that we're both of us are so passionate about. So yes, delighted to be here. I guess in terms of where to start, in terms of my own journey. So a lot of what I've done in my professional life over the past 20 odd years, really, it does in many ways stem from experiences that I had, particularly in my teenage years and into my early 20s. Without going into huge detail about that, my mental health was really turbulent in those times. I did go to some very dark places in those times, and I did kind of look life and death in the face. And, ultimately I chose to live. And that decision really is in many ways, what has fueled everything that I've done in the world of mental health and psychology, coaching, etc. ever since. And I actually, in a strange kind of way, I feel that is a sort of secret power that powers me, are those experiences. So my own journey is of, going into that metaphorical dark depth, rock bottom, and sort of rocketing my way out of it. And so in many ways, I remain kind of grateful for those experiences in a strange kind of way. One of the points of gratitude for it as well for me is that the empathy that allows me to have for people in very, dark and difficult places. And I suppose the confidence that I have that people can get themselves out of apparently hopeless situations. Yeah, that's really the starting point for everything that I've done ever since. And I guess, to give a very short, potted history of what I've done since, like that led me into sort of studying psychology, studying various topics around coaching, counselling, and sort of working particularly on mental health projects, particularly around young people and young people's mental health, but also moving into adult mental health as well. And then kind of one thing leading to another, and managing many mental health programs, projects, etc. Getting to a point where I myself burnt out, which is, definitely an important part of my own journey as well. And then kind of getting into training and consultancy, particularly for organisations and from all different sectors really, in relation to mental health awareness, mental health at work, mental health first aid. We got to a point just before the pandemic where the training team that I was running was delivering sort of multiple trainings every day. We, had trainings going on with like all sectors and walks of life in the country, which has given me a really interesting, fascinating insight into engaging with audiences in all manner of different contexts around the subjects of mental health. And, we had a wonderful impact. We trained 60,000 people across the country. I'm aware of lots of the direct impacts of that and also, some of the indirect impacts. So, yeah, the last few years, so I was doing that when the pandemic hit, and I had a big national team of people doing face-to-face training that sort of became a very different thing overnight. So I sort of took a bit of a step to the side and have been working more in the startup world and the sort of tech world since. But I'm kind of recently coming back more into the field of focusing more on the mental health space again. So it's really timely to be kind of having this conversation with you for me in my journey.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing so openly as well. I think the vulnerability of that, so touching on your own story, can really help for people that are going through dark times themselves to recognize that there is something else, there is another choice, there is hope, there is a rocket that they can maybe find to help get themselves out of the place they're in the same way that you did, and perhaps we can explore a bit more on how you did that and things that you would recommend others seek to support them in moving forward in their lives and choosing life, as you said. But I really want to also honor the incredible impact that you and your teams will have made, and the work that you've done in the past, as well as I'm quite excited for the things you'll be stepping into that allow you to bring together your lived experience and professional experience in mental health, as well as digital technology. That startup space is really quite exciting because there's so much potential for how those two worlds can come together, and digital technology help in the mental health space. So we might get on a little bit to that. Let's see where this goes. And Laurence, you said that it's quite timely that we're speaking now for the different things that are happening for you in your life currently. It also feels really timely to be speaking with you at this time of the year. So the point of recording, just in the midst of mental health awareness days that are taking place in February and early into March. And that meant for us having this conversation that we've got that in the backdrop as well, which is something that we touched on conversations we've had before recording this about the significance of awareness days, the importance of them, but also the limitation of them, the need for something more than what can sometimes just be a sort of tick box exercise, or something that gets a bit glazed over or becomes it's just another day. So I wondered if we might speak a little bit to that as we move into our conversation together.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the various awareness raising days and periods that there are through the year are often very useful, just conversation starters, and they're helpful for organisations and groups to sort of think about when they program sort of particular mental health activities. It's like the kind of the dog is not just for Christmas, isn't it? It's like, mental health awareness is not just for mental health awareness days, but they are helpful to have in an awareness of to get conversation started, really.
Yeah. And we purposefully decided that this conversation would be a conversation that was of a longer duration than normal, because there's so much to mental health as a very broad topic, and we won't be able, even within the spaciousness that we have, to cover everything probably that we would like to. But we spoke about wanting to really make this episode very impactful for those that have been struggling with their mental health, or worrying about somebody in their life who's struggling, or wanting to be better equipped to support those that they may work with or be in their friendship circles as and when there is a mental health struggle. I'm wondering what we might speak to around shifting stigma in relation to mental health. I guess that's another aspect that mental health awareness days do support with. And yet it feels like we've still got a long way to go when it comes to people that I work with in the coaching space. So most of the people that will reach out and make contact with me have been experiencing burnout, or they've had an experience of burnout in the past and are, keen to look at how they can prevent it from happening again. And, burnout impacts on people at every level, emotionally, psychologically, physically, spiritually. It takes its toll. And some people will experience a decline in their mental health more significantly than others will do. And sometimes the places that people will go to because of burnout, and burnout can be because of the dip in mental health, but the dip in mental health can be a sign and a symptom of burnout, and it can maybe be showing up more predominantly in other areas. I often find that people haven't been able to seek help and support because of the stigma, because they feel ashamed, or they don't feel that they know who they can connect with to speak about the reality of the struggle they're having mentally. I wonder if you might be able to say something to that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Stigma and stigma reduction is an enormous part of the whole topic. Yeah, a lot of the work that I've been involved with over a period of time has certainly been absolutely, focused on that, and it is key. Like, starting the conversations, it's all about, getting through those barriers that there are in people, acknowledging what's happening for them without that fear, without that concern of judgment, without that self-judgment. It's interesting, actually, when you mentioned before in relation to my own story, sort of what comes from how I got through my own sort of stuff. One of the things that I actually did that was really an important part of my own story was when I stopped telling people I was okay. This classic English thing, and, not only English, but, various British and other world cultures but we particularly have it bad here, is that we say, "How are you doing?" And we mean, "Hi." And when people said that, I stopped saying, "I'm fine," or "How are you?" I'd say, I'm not good." I would sometimes, use an expletive to say how I was doing, to be honest. But that was major for me. And there is a parallel in that, like, I sort of believe this about many aspects of life. It's like, to solve problems, you first have to acknowledge that problem, right? You have to be able to see the problem. And if that is obscured by stigma, if people are not willing to have those conversations and be real about what's happening, you can't even start solving the problem, right? So it's not the end of the story, but it is an absolutely necessary element in dealing with mental health on a personal level, or on a systemic or social level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's actually one of the biggest challenges that we face at the moment systemically, is we've normalized not being okay. We've normalized being in a sort of survival mode, being, for many people, excessively tired, overwhelmed, not knowing how people are going to get through the day or the week. Each day, kind of that, what used to be the kind of Monday morning blues, like, for people feeling that kind of slog on a day-to-day basis, but not feeling like that's something that they should say anything about, because that's what everybody's feeling like, right? And so that there's that collective, this is not okay, we are not okay, and we need to do something about this, because it's just sitting there, right, at the moment. And so many people are suffering because of that. And yet it doesn't need to be that way. We do have a choice. We can find another way out together. We need to, because when you talked about life and death, it's like, what is the point of being alive if we're all sitting and struggle every single day? That's not, nature was not, intending that for the planet, I'm sure. When we look at birds and bears and trees, and that we're designed to flourish. We have the blueprint inside. We know how. But if there are too many things in our way that are preventing that, then we need to also find ways together to to bring back the flourishing. Yeah, I know you've done a huge amount with mental health first aid and bringing that into organizations so that they can start to open up conversations when somebody is not okay and provide support in giving people the opportunity to have somebody they can go and speak to and say, I'm not okay. And then for people to be in place that are skilled and educated and have an understanding of the broad spectrum of mental health, right? Because it's not just the darkest days that is when somebody's struggling. It's the shades of grey, and mental health isn't just about the grey. It's also about all the other colours and ranges of experiences that we have mentally that take us to being in a really positive place in our mental health and well-being. Quite often the word gets thrown out and we think of the worst places that we can experience. But it's, I often think on it being like our physical health. Like we can be really fit and well in our mental health as much as in our physical health. And often those two obviously go hand in hand as well. But I'm wondering, when it comes to workplaces, having that awareness that there is a need for people in teams to have an understanding, to be equipped, to be a point of contact for people to say when they're not okay. What more do we need?
Well, a lot.
Mm.
In short, yeah, mental health first aid. Although I have led many mental health programs, and my teams did train people in mental health a great deal. Even mental health first aid there are some complexities with it because it's all about how you do that. It's all about how you embed that into the workplace. And actually, mental health first aid is not in itself the silver bullet to solve all the issues. It's really, in workplaces, we are talking about culture. We're talking about the whole culture and practice of organizations and how they treat people, really.
Mm.
That is, where we need to look when we're thinking about how organizations support employees with, in relation to mental health and also in relation to burnout as well. It's interesting, sort of linking to the stigma points as well, I guess, and the awareness raising sort of layer. I tend to look at it that there is an awareness raising and anti-stigma layer, which is absolutely necessary and fundamental. And that has to do with things like understanding prevalence as well. The amount of people that are experiencing mental health challenges under the surface that stigma and our ways of communicating don't allow us to see, but it's absolutely, enormous and all around our lives and our work. There's that awareness level, and then there are other levels on top. Mental health first aid is one, but there's other elements of like sort of training skills and culture that are really important in terms of, for example, things like how managers relate to people that they manage, the peer conversations that happen, senior leadership and the messages that they give, the practices of the organization, particularly in relation to HR and sort of, people, processes, etc. There's lots else that I could go into, but I suppose that feels like a reasonable way to succinctly put what some of the things organizationally that I see are.
Yeah, it really does. It feels like it's a bigger picture, right, than simply having mental health first aid in place. And yet it's a great starting point for organizations to think about how do we have somewhere where people can say, I'm not okay. And then I guess what you're starting to speak about is the prevention of people not being okay in the first place comes through that cultural piece. So looking at how do we create communities in organizations that actually care? How do we support managers to have the conversations and go about the ways that they work in ways that actually consider somebody's well-being? I can't help but be curious, because you also coach and are familiar with obviously coaching to quite an extent. The place I see coaching having the potential to dramatically change workplace culture where it's brought in, where a coaching approach is more prevalent in a workplace than other practices that can do harm. Like when we hear of toxic workplace cultures, for example, it's more often than not that there is no coaching in those environments, and people are very burned out. And so even if they want to care for each other, they simply can't because their cups are so empty. There's nothing to pour from. I'm wondering where your experience of mental health first aid in workplaces and organizational settings, and then your experience of coaching and how those two can kind of come together, perhaps.
I think it's interesting. I think a lot of the coaching skills are absolutely, gold in terms of trying to, spread some of those skills for non sort of professional coaches, but just for people managers to have those active listening skills. And to be honest, for people in organizations to have some of those active listening skills, to be able to, because to have those conversations, going back to sort of awareness raising, it's, we have to be willing to start conversations and open those doors and be willing to talk about mental health and talk about and use the language and normalize that. We also need to know what to do when somebody is talking to us about their mental health. And a lot of that, what works for that is very similar to, certainly big elements of coaching practice in terms of active listening. And for example, all the things that you don't do in particular. So I think there's an absolutely massive crossover for what is useful for supporting mental health in the workplace in terms of skills that are best broadly spread across an organization. Like, I'd love everybody in every organization to have the opportunity to train in active listening skills, particularly people managers, but not exclusively. There's also a place for, expert coaches, whether they're in-house, whether they're external. And I do think actually, in terms of having often been in a position of coming into organizations that has an external agents delivering training, consultancy, etc., related to mental health, I would say that there is a massive strength in having some separated external parties coming in some way to look at this stuff, because it can be hard to solve these things from the inside entirely, and having a fresh perspective from the outside is often a really important element, I think, in sort of best practice.
Yeah, I've really seen that to be true. And if you think even just on a micro level, whenever in our own family systems, we're having the same conversations, we're kind of doing the same things, we've got our patterns, our behaviors, the habitual stuff. And maybe we're faced with something that's not quite working and there's a tension. I know, being a mum with children, for example, if I say to one of my children, "Oh, why don't you try this?" Or, "Have you thought about that?" Or, "How might you approach this?" They can't engage with me in that way because I'm their mum. It's like coming from me. But if somebody else from outside the family unit asks them the very same question or suggests the very same thing, all of a sudden something shifts and they can take it on, and they've had a new idea. And I think, workplace systems are the same. It's really useful to have that individual or group of individuals that, come and support the system to take a step out from itself and open itself up and widen its view and think differently, shake up the thinking, explore different options. And the solutions will be there, that just as they are when we individually seek coaching, collectively, all the answers are often there. And at the same time, sometimes they aren't. And a bit of mentoring is actually really useful. Organizations that have been there, done it, and they've come out the other side and they've tried something else and they can give advice on steps that might be tried. So I think there's also a space, isn't there, for just as first aid and coaching coming together, coaching and mentoring actually being quite effective in tandem. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You mentioned about how prevalent mental health challenges or difficulties are. And, I suspect perhaps due to the stigma, there's not as much awareness actually of the number of people that are impacted on a day-to-day basis. with things that are difficult for them along those lines. I also know that, you spent quite a lot of time in the stats in the work that you were doing. And we had a conversation before recording about, the stats themselves also are kind of underrepresenting the bigger picture, because quite often when studies are conducted, they're of individuals who live in private homes that, that they don't necessarily encompass people in hospitals, in prisons, those that are homeless. There's a lot more people struggling perhaps than also the stats would indicate, I guess is what I'm saying. I know there's a really powerful tool that you use to bring some stats to life. I wondered if you might be willing to share a bit of that to help set the picture for people.
Yeah, so I was describing to you before, when we spoke before recording, this exercise that we used to run in the training that we did, which was there's an important stat about the 1 in 4, which is, well, the way that that's currently represented is that the 1 in 4 people in any one year will experience a mental health problem or challenge. We used to do an exercise where we'd have in the training room, like every 4th person would stand up. So if you had a room of 100 people, like 25 people would end up standing up, just randomly, not to do with their own mental health, of course, but just to represent the statistic. And then we also always had a big line about representing and thinking about carers and people that support people with mental health conditions or challenges. So we would also say, okay, so there's 25 people standing up. Imagine there's probably at least one other person directly supporting that person. So we would have the person next to that person stand up as well. And we would then say to the rest of the group, like, how prevalent do you now think that mental health is in your life? How many conversations are you having on a daily basis in your work and your life with somebody that's either living with a mental health challenge, a significant one, or they're directly caring for somebody or deeply personally affected? How important is mental health in your life? And people are looking around at the room and half the room standing up. The people in the training room, you could touch 3 or 4 people around you who are standing up, even if you're not one of them yourself. And it kind of just brings to life how enormous an issue this is for us all.
Yeah. Thank you, Laurence, because when you took me through that previously, I got like a visual in my head as if I was in one of your training rooms, with 100 other people, and just imagining 25 people literally standing up in a conference room, and how significant that is. And then imagining another 25 standing up and half the room stood up. And for me, there was a kind of like a physical impact that had on me in my body. And I felt that it would be useful to share that, because one of the other things we spoke about was our desire to normalize, as much as I said earlier, not being okay has been normalized, and the harm that that's doing. Equally, that's because it's in the shadows, and it's been normalized as if, well, don't complain and just get on with it, versus actually, no, hang on a minute, 50% of people are being impacted in this way. That is not okay. There's something we can be doing about that. How do we start to shift things so that it's a really very much smaller minority of people that are in struggle, versus something that's more likely to be, if those stats, if we're thinking about them being underrepresented, it's probably more like 75% of the room that are actually impacted. And in some cases, it's 100% of the room. And in many of the organizations that I've been in contact with, working with, providing and delivering trainings for, it's in the 90s, the number of people that are burning out. And, if only half of those people were struggling with their mental health because of that, then that's a huge number of people. It's something that we do actively need to do something about, and individually start taking responsibility for, and collectively. So I thank you for sharing it, because it really impacts on me when I hear stats like that brought to life, and it confirms for me the importance of these conversations and of the work that we do, and of supporting people to feel that they're not alone, and that there are options and things that they can bring into their life to help them to get out of feeling the way they're feeling, which I think is something that maybe we could start to move on to, because you describe yourself like skyrocketing out of where you were. And I'm really curious about that. I've noticed there might be something else you want to share at first.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There was just one, you just made me think, just as you were talking about the visuals, of just another example I wanted to give.
Yeah, please.
In the startup world, quite recently, actually. So I was at a kind of event with a load of startup founders and people in the sort of startup ecosystem, coaches, others. And there was a room, and it happens to have had like roughly 100 people in or something. Somebody, it wasn't me actually, somebody on the stage said, just out of interest, how many people in this room have experienced burnout or something like it? Every single person in that room put their hand up. And that was actually a very recent sort of real eye opener, even for me, and all the stuff that I've done. It's like, that was a really strong thing for me recently to see that. I just thought it's very similar sort of to that topic we're talking about.
Thank you for sharing that. I actually had a similar experience to that. Going back a few months, I delivered a talk to several hundred people at a workshop that were all executive assistants in the city. And similarly, every single person put their hand up. And, I guess the thing to sort of add as a bit of a sort of extra or tangent, perhaps a little, on burnout is that it is impacting on individuals in every single profession nowadays. It's not exclusively in, for example, the healthcare system or education, which is where the majority of studies about it have been conducted. It is something that's really prevalent and is a problem, and it's not sustainable for us to keep experiencing life in that way and continuing to struggle in that way. And it's not how things need to be either. There are ways that we can get out of this, but we need to support each other in doing that. So, Laurence, as well with stats, I wonder about us speaking to some of the stats specifically around self-harm and suicidal ideation and suicide in general. Because when I sort of shared about mental health being a spectrum and that there's sort of shades of it, the darkest side of that scale, really for some people, those dark days, as you alluded at the beginning of our conversation, can mean that people are wondering about taking their own life, choosing death over life and opting out because the struggle feels so overwhelming that they can't keep going. And in the coaching space, whilst coaching isn't set up as something that people would go to as the reason, the topic that they would be bringing to explore, other professionals are trained specifically in navigating suicidality, and it would be a psychotherapist or a counsellor that somebody would reach out to because of feeling that they're in that place of despair in their life. But nonetheless, in the coaching space and in many spaces, suicidality is going to arise because it actually impacts on the exact same proportion of society, as you shared earlier, that have a mental health struggle. 1 in 4 people, so 25% of people, have ideas around suicide in their lifetime. And that's really significant. And those ideas of ending their life for some people will be quite fleeting. It might be that they've had a particularly tough week and they just think, what's the point? I don't know how I'm going to keep doing this anymore. And that comes in and goes out, and there's nothing more with that they ruminate on or go back to or start to think more along the lines of actually how would I end my life then, and starting to make a plan or making any actual attempt. But 1 in 13 people will make an attempt to end their life, and in a coaching space, especially in relation to burnout, where sometimes people will find themselves struggling to such an extent that they do feel like opting out is, and ending their own life is the only option that they have. It's really important. I know we felt on a kind of side conversation to this one to bring awareness to the fact that having ideas about suicide is something that is a normal part of us as a human when we're experiencing extreme stress or we're feeling extremely low or empty. If we're not feeling we've got sufficient purpose, like there can be many, many reasons that we would feel that way. In relation to burnout, often it's been because we've been doing too much for too long, or we're trying to contend or cope with too much, and it's like a pressure button, And so it comes into the coaching space quite a lot, and it's one of the things that I'm really passionate about when I train coaches who want to work with a specialism in burnout, is that they understand how to navigate suicidality in coaching conversations. Because if somebody doesn't feel safe to share that they've been having ideas about ending their life, then they're carrying that on their own, and they're more likely then to act on that thinking. Whereas if they are able to share it with a coach and with other people in their lives, so other professionals, but also friends, family members, it's far less likely, the evidence shows, that person then will act on the thinking they've been having. So I really wanted to start to build into our conversation, not just the awareness raising that the stats give of this is the reality, this is the number of people, but also that by talking about it, we help to alleviate the weight of it, and we help people to find the way forward and the way out of it. And that by asking questions about whether somebody is having thinking along those lines, we don't make it worse. We actually make things better. We can't really get it wrong in terms of, asking and are you thinking about taking your own life? That line of inquiry helps someone to feel like, oh, you're someone I could share that with. I could bring that here. So that's a really positive thing. Now, coaches, of course, if it was coming into a coaching conversation and there was concern about somebody's sense of safety, a coach would hopefully be a well-trained one, signposting to other professionals that somebody could then go and speak to. Similarly to a first aider in a workplace environment. I mentioned about psychotherapists and counsellors. There are also many charities, that we will include in the show notes that can support. The Samaritans being the most predominant one in the UK, but I know people listen to this podcast from all different corners of the world. So we'll make sure there's notes in the show notes for you around this. First and foremost, as well, if you're finding there's thinking along those lines that you're having and you're worried about yourself because of that thinking, then seeking support is really key because there are people there that can help, and there are means to supporting you. And even going as an initial step and speaking to your GP would then be able to put you in touch with people in your locality. There are often, especially in the UK, crisis teams, for example, locally, that many people won't know exist, that are there, and lots of things that can be done intervention-wise to help. So Laurence, I wondered if you could share a little bit on that side of things. And again, on the stats side, I know there's more along those lines that you also could bring into this conversation that I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with everything that you've said there. And it is hugely important. Stats-wise, I guess one of the ones that is often quite impactful for people to hear if they're not aware, or to be reminded of if they are, is that suicide is still the leading cause of death for men under 50. So again, thinking about how much of an issue this is, a serious number of lives are being lost. And there are many of us out there. I'm somebody myself that has also, I've lost people that I've been connected to, and many people out there will have and have been impacted in those kind of ways as well. There's nothing more important, really. And, I talked at the beginning of our conversation about my own experiences of looking at suicide and considering that for myself. And yeah, I guess not only from my own experience, but now through almost 20 years of being involved in supporting other people in relation to mental health, the number of people that I've seen who have experienced, whether it is like this sort of suicide ideation that you're talking about, or further down that spectrum of sort of the severity of those suicidal thoughts and feelings, then the number of people that have been sitting in those places that, almost or will invariably feel hopeless. Hopelessness is a huge part of what, of what people feel that leads them into that direction. And the number of people that including myself, that I am aware of that have been in those places of hopefulness and found a way to re-find that hope and come out and have, completely transformed lives. And I'm one of those people. I've seen thousands of people, go through that journey in one way, shape or form, whether that's myself or hearing about, people through programs that I've run, etc. So, there is absolutely always hope in it. It always has to do with acknowledging where somebody is. I think that the way out of that, the way to come out of those places has, the starting point is acknowledging the problem. As I said earlier in a conversation, in a different context, but whether that is about recognizing to yourself that this is, happening for you, and as you were saying, the importance of reaching out to people around you, to get all the things that you said, going to see the GP, finding stuff from reliable sources online, whether it is the charities, whether it is Samaritans, whether it is Mind, Rethink, the other various helplines that you said you'd put in the show notes, whether it is talking to trusted others or professionals or anyone, to be honest. And exactly as you said as well, from the other side of that equation, and the importance of asking those questions. And even if we don't know what we're going to do when we get the answer, even if you've got that fear of, what if I ask somebody if they're thinking about taking their own life and they say, yes, what am I going to do? Well, guess what? It's going to be better than not having asked the question. Like, if somebody's answer is yes, you have done a wonderful thing by getting that far. You're in a better, infinitely better place to think about how you support and help that person you would have been had you not asked the question. You're not going to put it in somebody's head if they weren't thinking about it before. One of the other barriers that comes up to asking that question is is it going to be a little bit awkward if they weren't, if that isn't what they meant? And do you know what? Yeah, it might be. If you say, "Do you think about taking your own life?" and they say, "No, I actually didn't mean that at all." Yeah, all right. You can, we can deal with a tiny amount of awkwardness. That is, you have to weigh that against the prospect of being in that situation, not asking the question and regretting that later. Now, none of us are perfect. If you have been in that position, and I have been in that position, looking back and looking at that hindsight and wishing that I'd asked the question, you do not deserve to beat yourself up about that. Nobody does. Nobody has that perfect hindsight, but you do have, that perfect foresight. But you do have an opportunity in the future to consider asking that question when you're in that position again. That is, what you can do. And you have that opportunity to potentially save somebody's life. That is one of the most wonderful things that you can do. All the things that I've achieved in my professional life, honestly, the successful suicide interventions that I've done are absolutely the things that I'm genuinely the most grateful and sort of proud of, I suppose, that have, in all the work that I've done. Yeah. So do ask the question.
Thank you, Laurence. I think it's, really important to underline, and the way you've built on it as well, in terms of the naming the emotions, I guess, that we can feel on the other side of the conversation, like the worry of what might get in the way of us being able to ask. And maybe also not knowing how you might recognize when to ask is something I also wondered, because people do a really good job of hiding things, right? Of masking, of attempting to keep showing up in the way that's expected of them. And, so it's often quite subtle when people are struggling and not doing well, especially when we're all struggling collectively. It's hard to really discern, is John all right, or is he really not all right? How concerned should I be about him? And I think what's been useful for me in some of the trainings that I've done, and what I bring into the training space myself, is around the metaphor that people will often speak to what's really going on through terms that implicitly imply what is happening but isn't explicitly stating it. So it's, I guess, being aware that if someone talks about, a bit like we did at the beginning of the conversation, dark days, what do you mean by a dark day? Is it
Yeah.
Is it I've got that Monday morning blues, or is it I literally can't face getting out of bed and seeing anybody and doing anything, and I'm thinking I don't want to be here at all, full stop.
Yeah.
What is that dark day? And it could come through, description of, quite often people will talk about like weather type symbolism in relation
Mm,
to themselves. So,
mm,
life just feels really stormy, or it might be about something in their physicality, that there's just a huge amount of weight on my shoulders right now, and I
mm.
don't think I can bear that weight anymore. What do you really mean by that? And that's the kind of the bridge, I guess, to the conversations often, is in those subtleties of the metaphor that might be used. And then the other bit that occurred to me was when somebody says, well, yes, I have actually been thinking along those lines. Where do you go next? And for people not to feel that they then are needing to carry the burden for that person, and that they're then responsible for it, but actually knowing that they can signpost themselves, that they can, well, have you thought about speaking to your GP? Maybe if it feels within your capacity and you're not overextending in the relationship, or in, but being perhaps the person that supports in making the phone call to the GP, or going to the GP with your friend, your colleague, or whoever the person is that you've had the conversation with, because sometimes it's that lending a hand to get the extra support that somebody needs, because when somebody's struggling on their own, that bit might just be the bit that feels too much, and you might not know what they need next, but somebody else will know. And if you can help them get to that person, that can make a huge difference, I think.
100%. And,
Yeah.
you know, in terms of not knowing what to do, it can often be really impactful to just be authentic and just sort of
Yes.
be with somebody and say, look, I don't know what to do about this.
Yeah.
Let's think about that
Absolutely.
together. Like, what do we need to do to address this? Let's think, let's research, let's look up some websites from reputable, trusted sources and figure out what they say about what we could think about doing. So yeah, you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know the
Yeah.
perfect response for what you do to be useful. I will say, if you are interested in this subject and supporting other people, I mean,
Mm.
having actual suicide intervention training is a wonderful thing to
Yeah.
do as well. There's something called ASSIST, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. That is a great one. But, there's lots of ways to access that out there. I do want to just pick up one thing for around signs as well. So risks, factors, and so forth. Well, signs that might lead you to think that you want to ask the question. I love what you're saying about the language there that people use, and
Mm.
completely agree with that. Things like, how are you doing? And someone says, well, ups and downs. And, again, that clarification, what do you mean by that? The other really big thing is change from somebody's normal personality, or change in their behavior, change in their attitudes, in the things that they say. One of the really surprising signs that people are often not aware of, people are aware of the kind of like certain categories of signs of people being very down and very hopeless and very depressed. But
Mm.
there is a whole category of signs of people whose mood suddenly picks up because they have made an internal decision that they think is going to be the way out for them. So if people can, there are circumstances where people can look like they've suddenly turned a positive corner. And, classically, people might start giving people gifts, giving away possessions, finding ways to subtly say bye-bye to people. And some of that sort of stuff is, a category of signs that if you're not tuned into it can be easy to miss. But the biggest thing of all is change from what is somebody's normal state. If you know them well, obviously, if you don't know somebody well, you don't know that. But
Yeah.
if it is somebody that you're close to, then changing their behavior, is a massive thing to watch out for.
Thank you, Laurence. I think it's a really valuable add. And I know that I sort of started asking a question around, how we can build out from that place of despair, that hopelessness. And I sort of referenced the phrase used at the beginning about sort of skyrocketing out from the dark days being your experience of what was possible for you. I wonder if we could start to kind of move towards what that journey might look like, because it's not obviously not always skyrocketing, but I'd love to hear about how it was that way for you, but equally how, it might be a slower, longer build out from a dark place for others. And but at the same time, there is still this shifting out of, there's a hope, there's something different, something better, something that's worth living for on the other side. Where might you like to go with that?
Yeah, great, lovely question. I think it's usually an accumulation of small things. And that is what it kind of was for me. I mean, it was, for me personally, it was about stopping certain sets of behaviors and starting other ones. And starting those behaviors was one foot in front of the next. It wasn't, it was, for me personally, that involved sort of coming across meditation, yoga, things like that. For the first time I did that, that was, getting my feet to walk me to somewhere where that was happening, because it was something that appealed to me. Obviously, what is going to work for one person is not what, not going to be the same set of things that work for somebody else. But for me, for that period of time, it was stopping, particularly things like alcohol and stuff that for me at the time was feeding into where I was, and starting those like small positive steps. Go to this class. I think, as I said earlier, stopping telling people I was okay when they asked.
Yeah.
I started telling basically everybody that said, "How are you?" I'd be like, "I'm terrible." And that sort of combination of things, obviously, like there's lots and lots of things that I did over time to build on that. But it was absolutely those first yards that are the most important and critical, and just making that decision, really, that I suppose, as I mentioned earlier, I kind of felt I did look that question of life and death in the face, and I decided to live. And that decision sort of almost naturally led into, well, okay, if I am going to live, then let's try and do it as well as I can and give myself the best possible chance of living a life that I actually enjoy, or moving in that direction. And it's that classic thing, isn't it, of like, if you can do things 1% better than you did yesterday, then like I don't know the math, but there'll be a certain number of days that you're, 100% better than you were before. It's those small steps that can actually take you to enormously different sort of vistas of your own life.
Enormously different vistas of your own life. It feels so powerful. And now the skyrocketing makes sense. That it was, the skyrocketing was made possible by lots of little things, like the cumulative effect of lots of little things, which, it's probably no surprise to you that that's the route out from burnout for people too. It's never an overnight quick fix, big thing, but big things do happen because of lots of decisions to do lots of different things differently. There are 2 episodes that were recorded as part of the previous series that I will also include in the show notes, and I'll just briefly mention, because one is titled Awe and Burnout, and the other is Anhedonia. And both of those conversations are about finding the glimmers, the things that light and spark joy, the bringing yourself back to yourself, alivening again, and for some people, as you suggested, there might be a practice or something that you build in, like meditation, yoga, going out in nature, walking. A lot of the time it is about all of the things that are around us that are free and that we can access and that our body responds really powerfully to. We might not notice the response at first because we can feel a bit numb to life in general. Like that's the anhedonia often, is just that meh, the grey sort of shades that we'll experience, which sometimes mean that we can feel, or it can lead to depression when we're in that, but not always. And similarly with, suicidal ideation, it's not necessarily that somebody is experiencing extreme depression either. It can present in different ways for different people. But knowing that by finding things that we might have to almost force ourselves to do. There's another interview that's coming to mind with Dr. David Hamilton, who has done a lot around the mind and body connection. And And actually, if we kind of make ourselves make an expression with our face or move our body in a certain way, it changes the biochemistry, and our body will respond to that as if we are having the feeling associated with the smile. Or, he talks about power poses and things to help boost
Yeah.
people's confidence. But when we make ourselves go out in nature, for example, nature, we are nature, and nature is hugely healing, hugely regulating for our nervous systems. It helps us to find awe, because we can often see awe outside of ourselves more easily than we can inside of ourselves when we're in a place of hopelessness. So we're more likely to notice the sound of a bird, or the way the sun's shining on leaves, or how the rain feels on our face, and remember that there's something worth living for. I really love what you shared there. It feels really impactful and reminds us that things are reachable to us, even when we're in our darkest places. Is my hope for those that are listening, Laurence.
Me too.
I'm so glad that whatever sparked for you did do so that you were able to build on those cumulative things. And was there anything particular, or anyone in particular, that crossed your path at that time that made a difference?
Yeah, there were a number of different people. I can remember the first friends that I talked to about some of the things that I was feeling. I remember, obviously, I mentioned the meditation teacher, who I didn't necessarily talk to about this stuff, but was a very positive figure in my life. Also, going to mention my mum, who was fantastic at that time and was very focused on helping me, like, really shorten my horizons and just think about how I could get through sort of days and weeks. I wasn't exactly opening up to her fully about the stuff that I was experiencing in relation to suicide at the time, but I was talking to her about, like, being in a bad place, and she was really helping me to, as I say, focus on, can I get through this day? Can I get through this week? And sort of, she was fantastic in that regard. So yeah, thanks, Mum.
Oh, thank you, Laurence. It's beautiful. That idea of the very small things and the micro feels really significant, I think, too, because if we can focus on one thing that might make me feel even just that tiny little bit better than I do right now, for this next moment, this next hour, and gently build on that. I'm wondering how we link where we're at now in our conversation together to where we were a little while back, contemplating the kind of collective systemic not okayness. And, similarly, some people who might be listening to this and thinking about their organization and how far away they are from okayness in their organizational setting. Also, it can feel quite overwhelming to find a way out, to feel like something different is possible. But it's also those micro things that are brought in the organizational sense as well that build something different, right? I'm wondering if you've seen that in any settings where you've brought in first aid and seen the ripple effect where change has occurred and shifts have happened.
Yes, I mean, absolutely enormously so. There is a parallel with the personal recovery story, which is I guess is that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, isn't it? Like, that's another way of saying what I was saying before, is that it is those small things that get balls rolling. And again, the hope that there is for organisational and societal transformation as well. I think it's important to bear in mind that everyone within an organisation and a society wants that organisational society to be positive in relation to how it treats the people in it. Ultimately, there might be some complexity in the way of that, but like that is there, and it's something you can tap into. I think very, trying to summarize quite a massive, obviously, subject about how you change organizations and societies. But I think there is kind of like, there's that top down and bottom up element, and that is really important. You can't, impose these things from above. Equally, if you you can't just bottom up transform things or at least it's challenging to do so, a lot more challenging to do so if there is like resistance to that or, from the top down. So really what you need is a combination of those two things, but both of those things can start in very simple ways. So like having simple conversations at the top of organizations and politically in whatever kind of groups you're thinking of. And, having that openness to sort of just, for a start, acknowledge the problem, acknowledge that there is an issue, look at some of the stats, acknowledge that there is an issue and that you're open to changing some things to help resolve that issue. It doesn't have to be that organizations know perfectly how to do transformation in this way overnight. It's like acknowledge that there's a problem and share a collective willingness to look at what can be done about it. From the bottom up, trainings that we used to run were a fantastic way of starting those conversations. But however you get those conversations started, like people want to change things. In whatever organization you look at, there will be people different in different contexts, but there will be people there who want to drive that change and really care about this stuff. And as I say, everybody ultimately wants to be in places that are supportive and human, positive. And so it's just tapping into things that are already there. And again, starting those conversations. I think there is more to unpack once the conversations are started. But the key thing, if those conversations aren't started, is, doing that first step and asking the question and, opening that door. And then, that will lead on to other levels of what that change looks like that you can then go on to discover.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said earlier, looking at what support you might be able to bring in so that there is someone, whether that's a person or a group, helping to hold you with those conversations and with making that change. And whether that's exclusively with coaching, whether it's a combination of some sort of coaching and consultancy, coaching and mentoring, but seeking support to bring about what's already, there inside the solutions will lie, but to help those to really open out so that the well ingrained habits and patterns of ways of relating and behaving have an opportunity to truly be surfaced and shifted. It's been so good speaking with you, Laurence. I'm so glad we were able to
likewise.
Find the time together to record this. It's felt like a real treat to have this spaciousness with you. So I'm very, very grateful for the generosity of your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a fantastic conversation to have. And I look forward to continuing the conversation with you and others. But thank you for the space to talk about this and connect.
Thank you, Laurence. Take care and connect again soon.
Thank you for listening to Burnout to Brilliance. I hope today's conversation offered you insight, comfort, or a spark of inspiration to carry into your week. If you enjoyed the episode, please do take a moment to follow the podcast. Share it with someone who might benefit, write a review, and connect with me, Jayne Morris MCC and Balanceology over on LinkedIn or at balanceology.uk, where you'll find more tools, training, and community support. Remember, burnout isn't the end of your story. It's an invitation to rewrite it. Until next time, sending you my warmest wishes. Please do stay connected. And together, let's keep creating the communities of care that have the real power to help us collectively move from burnout to brilliance.